Welcome to another deep dive, listeners. Today we're heading north, virtually speaking, to Stockholm, Sweden.
Always a good destination.
Right. And we're digging into this really interesting report called Återblick på Skillnadernas Stockholm.
Which, for those of us who don't speak Swedish, means
Basically, a look back at Stockholm's differences. Yeah, I'm always fascinated by how cities, especially these really beautiful, efficient ones, handle social sustainability. And Stockholm is kind of held up as a model.
yeah, they've got a reputation.
Exactly. But this report, it's not just like Stockholm, everything's perfect. It acknowledges the challenges.
The elephant in the room, or maybe the moose on the street in this case.
Exactly. So you get me. It talks about how Stockholm has been through a lot, especially recently. Like think about the 2015 refugee influx, right? Then the pandemic hits everybody, and now the war in Ukraine. All these things have an impact.
Absolutely. Those are global events that shake up even the most stable societies. And this report, it's like a follow-up, right, to a similar one from back in 2015.
Bingo. So it's like a direct comparison before and after these major events. We get to see trends, some really interesting data points. I think you'll be particularly into this one because they really zero in on social equity.
Can't wait. Hit me with it.
Okay, so let's start with the most fundamental thing, the health and well-being of the people.
Makes sense. Got to start with the basics. How are the good people of Stockholm doing?
Well, this is where it gets interesting because it's almost like a tale of two cities, you know.
Oh, I'm intrigued. How so?
So on paper, Stockholm is crushing it. Lifespans are up, fewer sick days, even kids' teeth are healthier, which I thought was kind of a random but great detail.
No, I love that. It speaks to a broader focus on preventative care, public health initiatives, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But, and this is a big but,
There's always a but.
it's not reaching everyone equally.
The disparities rear their ugly head.
Right, like, check this out. In 2022, a woman living in the Norra Innerstaden area, that's like a really well-off part of town, she could expect to live, on average, 7 years longer than a man in Skärholmen, which is a less affluent area. 7 years in the same city.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that's stark. Makes you really stop and think about the why behind that difference.
Totally. And it's not just about lifespan, right? It's about quality of life, access to healthcare, food security, all those things that contribute to well-being.
Absolutely. And what about the kids growing up in these very different environments? I mean, that's got to have an impact.
That is the perfect segue because next up, we're diving into upbringing and education in Stockholm. What are the opportunities like for these kids, and are they getting an equal shot at success?
All right, let's talk education then.
So the good news is child poverty is down in Stockholm. Always a good sign.
Definitely a step in the right direction.
And school enrollment is consistently high. So kids are going to school, which is great. But
Uh-oh, here comes that but again. What's the catch?
the report found a stubborn gap in academic achievement between students from different socioeconomic backgrounds.
Okay, that's not uncommon, unfortunately. Even when kids technically have access to the same education, other factors come into play. Did the report dig into the why behind this gap at all?
They did, and it's really interesting. One of the biggest correlations they found was with the parents' educational background. Kids whose parents went to university are just way more likely to graduate high school prepared for university themselves.
So it's like this cycle. If you don't see higher education as the norm in your family, it's harder to break through, even if it's available.
Exactly, and that has huge implications, not just for the kids themselves, but for Stockholm's future workforce, for social mobility, everything.
Fascinating. So we've got a healthy, long-living city, at least for some, and an education system that seems to perpetuate existing social structures. What's next?
Well, next up is everyone's favorite topic, work and finances. And the report actually reveals a bit of a paradox in Stockholm. So, good news first, employment rates. Up, across the board.
Okay, so the Stockholm economy is humming along.
Humming is an understatement. They're
Yeah.
doing really well. Even in areas that have historically lagged behind, more people are employed. Points to a
Right.
pretty strong job market.
That's encouraging. So people are working, contributing. That's got to be good for the city overall, right?
Absolutely. But,
Oh, I knew there was a but coming. There's always a but.
right, so here it is, income inequality. Also up. And not just by a little bit. The report suggests the gap between the haves and the have-nots is widening. So even though more people are employed, the gains aren't being felt equally.
Exactly. Those at the top are seeing the biggest benefits, while others, even if they're working, aren't necessarily seeing their income keep pace. And this is happening in a city known for its social safety nets. It makes you think, you know.
It does. It challenges the assumption that a strong economy automatically lifts everyone up. Especially, as you said, in a place like Stockholm, which has a reputation for taking care of its people.
And this is particularly interesting because Stockholm is such a knowledge-based economy, right?
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder about the long-term implications.
Right, because if a significant portion of the population can't afford to participate in that knowledge economy, what happens?
Exactly. It's a recipe for social stratification. And that brings us to another critical piece of the puzzle housing and the urban environment in Stockholm. Because where you live,
Yeah.
huge impact on your life.
Huge. And this report does not sugarcoat the challenges Stockholm is facing on that front. Affordable housing. Big problem, especially for low-income residents and newcomers.
It's a classic case of supply and demand, or rather, lack of supply. Stockholm is growing, but the availability of affordable housing isn't keeping pace.
And it sounds like it's not just about quantity either. The report seems to be pushing Stockholm to think about how they're building, not just how much.
Exactly, because they could just build a ton of expensive high-rises, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't solve the problem of segregation, of creating neighborhoods where everyone feels welcome and can afford to live.
It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. Well, not if some of those boats are already underwater.
Perfectly put. And that leads us to another fascinating dimension the report explores: democracy and security in Stockholm. Because feeling safe and feeling like your voice matters, that's huge.
It's foundational to a healthy society. So what did they find?
Well, buckle up, because this is where things get a little concerning. They found a trend of declining voter turnout, especially in, you guessed it, areas with lower socioeconomic indicators.
Oh, wow. So it's like a double whammy. Not only are some residents struggling economically, but they're also feeling less engaged, less empowered to participate in the political process that directly affects their lives.
It's a worrying sign. Because if people feel like their voices don't matter, like the system isn't working for them, what happens to that social contract we all rely on?
And it creates this vicious cycle, right? Because if certain communities are already marginalized and then they disengage from the political process, who's advocating for their needs?
Precisely. And this sense of disenfranchisement, it bleeds into other aspects of life in Stockholm. For example, the report also found a clear disparity in how safe residents feel in different neighborhoods.
So as we kind of wrap our heads around all this tale of two cities within Stockholm, what really stands out to you from this report?
You know, it's interesting because on one hand, Stockholm is doing a lot right. They're aware of these disparities. They're trying to address them. But there's this persistent gap,
Yeah.
between aspiration and reality, maybe.
Like, they've got the ideas, but turning those ideas into real change for everyone, that's the hard part.
Exactly. And I think that's something a lot of cities, especially globally minded, progressive ones, are struggling with right now.
It's not just a Stockholm thing.
Not at all. Think about it. Balancing economic growth with social equity. That's the million-dollar question everywhere. Same with housing, right? Everyone wants affordable housing, but how do you actually make it happen, especially as cities grow?
It's like this puzzle, and no one's found all the pieces yet.
Exactly. And I think that's why this report, even though it's specific to Stockholm, it's got these broader takeaways for anyone interested in how cities work, how they can be better.
So if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but what can I do? What would you say to them?
That's the big question, right? First, stay informed. Pay attention to what's happening in your own city. Go to those city council meetings, even if they're boring.
Or maybe especially if they're boring, because that probably means not enough people are paying attention.
Exactly. And then get involved. Support organizations that are doing good work on the ground. Volunteer your time. Donate if you can. Every little bit helps.
And don't be afraid to have those tough conversations with your neighbors, with your elected officials, because all of this, it's a collective effort, right?
Absolutely. Cities are these living, breathing things. They're constantly changing. And it's up to all of us to shape that change, to push for the future we want to see.
I love that. So for everyone listening, consider this your official call to action. Go out there, make some noise, and let's build better cities together. That's it for our deep dive into Stockholm. Thanks for joining us, everyone.